Egypt groaned beneath the weight of its own power. Great monuments pierced the sky, carved by hands that were never free. Beneath the scorching sun, Hebrew slaves labored without mercy. Bricks, mud, blood, sweat, generation after generation crushed under Pharaoh's fear. For the Israelites had grown numerous, strong, and Pharaoh trembled at the thought of rebellion. So he issued a decree as cruel as it was desperate. Every Hebrew baby boy must die. Mothers hid their children in shadows, in silence, in trembling hope. One mother, refusing to surrender her son to death, crafted a tiny ark of reeds, sealed with pitch. At dawn she placed the infant inside and set him upon the Nile, entrusting his life to currents stronger than fear. The river carried him not to doom, but to destiny. Pharaoh's daughter found the child among the reeds. Compassion overruled politics. She adopted him, naming him Moses, drawn out of water. Raised in palaces instead of huts, Moses grew as a prince of Egypt, educated, powerful, yet unknowingly bound to a different heritage. Years passed. One day Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, one of his own people. Something ancient awakened inside him. Rage. Justice. Identity. He struck the Egyptian down and buried him in the sand. But secrets do not stay buried long. Pharaoh learned of it. Moses fled into the wilderness, prince turned fugitive, power turned to dust. In Midian he became a shepherd, living a quiet life among mountains in silence, far from palaces and politics. Years slipped by like drifting sand. Then one day, while tending sheep near Mount Horeb, Moses saw something impossible. A bush engulfed in fire, yet not consumed. Flames danced without destroying. Light burned without ash. As he approached, a voice thundered from the fire, shaking heaven and earth. "Remove your sandals. The place where you stand is holy ground." Moses trembled. The voice declared itself the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and revealed a mission that would redefine history. "I have seen the suffering of my people. I have heard their cries. You will go to Pharaoh. You will bring them out." Moses protested. He felt inadequate, broken, fearful. But the voice answered with authority beyond argument. "I will be with you." Armed not with armies but with a shepherd's staff and divine promise, Moses returned to Egypt. Accompanied by his brother Aaron, to confront the most powerful ruler on earth. "Let my people go." Pharaoh laughed. Why would a king release his labor force? Why bow to a god he did not acknowledge? Pride hardened his heart like stone. Then came the plagues. The Nile turned to blood. Fish died. Stench filled the land. Frogs invaded homes, beds, ovens. Gnats swarmed. Flies darkened the sky. Livestock perished. Boils erupted on skin. Hail shattered crops. Locusts devoured what remained. Darkness fell, thick, suffocating, unnatural. Still Pharaoh refused. Finally came the most devastating blow. A night of judgment. Every household in Egypt would lose its firstborn, from palace to prison, except those marked by obedience. The Israelites slaughtered lambs, painted their doorposts with blood, and waited in solemn silence. At midnight a cry erupted across Egypt: grief, terror, irreversible loss. Pharaoh broke. "Go. Leave. Take your people and go." Freedom arrived not with celebration but with urgency. Hundreds of thousands departed: families, elders, children, livestock, a nation reborn overnight. They carried unleavened bread, hope, and uncertainty into the wilderness. But tyranny does not surrender easily. Pharaoh's regret ignited fury. Chariots thundered across the desert in pursuit. The Israelites found themselves trapped, the Red Sea before them, the Egyptian army behind them, panic rising like a storm. Moses lifted his staff. Wind howled. Waters parted. A pathway opened through the sea, towering walls of water on either side, a corridor of impossible salvation. The people crossed on dry ground, fear turning to awe with every step. When the Egyptians followed, the waters returned. The sea closed. Silence fell. The oppressor's power vanished beneath the waves. On the far shore, the Israelites sang not just for survival, but for liberation. Yet freedom brought new challenges. The wilderness was harsh, unforgiving. Hunger gnawed. Thirst tormented. Doubt resurfaced. The people complained, longing even for the familiarity of slavery over the uncertainty of freedom. But provision came. Manna appeared each morning like dew turned to bread. Quail filled the camp at dusk. Water burst from rock at Moses' command. Pillars of cloud guided by day, fire by night, visible signs that they were not abandoned. Then came Mount Sinai. Thunder rolled. Lightning split the sky. Smoke engulfed the mountain as if earth itself trembled before heaven. Moses ascended into the storm to meet God face to face. There he received the law, commandments etched in stone, a covenant defining justice, morality, and identity. A nation of slaves was becoming a people with purpose. But while Moses remained on the mountain, fear infected the camp below. Impatience turned to rebellion. The people crafted a golden calf, worshipping the very thing that enslaved them. Power, certainty, visible control. Judgment followed. Mercy followed judgment. The covenant endured, though scarred. Years passed in the wilderness, a generation shaped by hardship, discipline, and divine guidance. Battles fought. Alliances formed. Faith tested repeatedly. Moses led, interceded, endured, bearing the weight of an entire nation's hopes and failures. At last they approached the promised land, the destination promised centuries earlier. A land flowing with abundance, freedom, identity. Yet Moses himself would not enter. From a mountain overlooking the land, he gazed upon the fulfillment of the promise he had spent his life pursuing. Leader, lawgiver, liberator, he entrusted the people to the next generation. His journey had begun in water and ended on a mountain, between rescue and revelation. The Exodus was more than escape. It was transformation. From slaves to citizens. From despair to covenant. From oppression to destiny. And the story echoed through time as proof that even the mightiest empire cannot withstand divine justice, that freedom often requires a wilderness before a homeland, and that leaders are sometimes called to guide others to promises they themselves will never possess. The sea had parted. Chains had shattered. A nation had been born in fire, water, and faith. After the death of Moses, silence settled over the camp of Israel like a heavy fog. For 40 years, one man had been their voice, their guide, their connection to God. Now he was gone. The people stood on the edge of the Jordan River, staring across at the land promised to their ancestors, a land of hills, cities, armies, and uncertainty. Leadership passed to Joshua, Moses' faithful assistant, a warrior shaped by wilderness, loyal yet burdened by the weight of expectation. God spoke to him with words both comforting and commanding. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. I am with you wherever you go. Strength would be necessary. Courage would be tested. At flood stage, the Jordan River roared like a barrier between promise and reality. There were no bridges, no boats large enough for a nation. But as the priests carrying the ark stepped into the water, something miraculous happened. The river stopped. Waters piled up upstream as if held back by an invisible hand. The riverbed dried. The entire nation crossed on solid ground, echoing the miracle of the Red Sea, but this time not as fugitives, as conquerors. Once across, Joshua ordered 12 stones taken from the riverbed and stacked as a memorial, a reminder that future generations would ask, "What do these stones mean?" And the answer would be, "God brought us here." Their first target stood directly ahead, Jericho. Jericho was not a village. It was a fortress. Thick walls, armed defenders, gates sealed tight. Militarily, Israel had no siege engines, no advanced weapons, no tactical advantage. Instead, they were given instructions that sounded almost absurd. March around the city once each day for 6 days. On the 7th day, march 7 times. Priests blow trumpets. The people shout. No ladders. No battering rams. No assault. Just faith. For 6 days, the soldiers marched in silence. The inhabitants of Jericho watched from the walls, mocking, confused, perhaps amused. What kind of army attacks with music and walking? On the 7th day, tension built with every circuit around the city. When the trumpets blasted and Joshua commanded the shout, thousands of voices erupted at once, a thunder of human sound shaking the air. The ground trembled. Walls cracked. Stone shattered. Jericho collapsed into chaos, its defenses reduced to rubble in moments. The city fell not by human strength, but by divine intervention. Victory, however, did not end the struggle. The land was full of nations unwilling to surrender. Battles raged across hills and valleys, ambushes, sieges, alliances forming and breaking. At one critical moment, as enemies attempted to escape under cover of nightfall, Joshua prayed boldly, "Sun, stand still." And the daylight lingered. Time itself seemed to pause, allowing Israel to secure victory. Whether by miracle of perception or suspension of nature, the message was clear: heaven fought alongside them. Not all victories were clean. Internal failures brought consequences. When one man secretly kept forbidden plunder from Jericho, Israel suffered defeat at the small city of Ai. The lesson was harsh: disobedience could weaken an entire nation. After repentance, they returned, this time with strategy and unity, and Ai fell. Gradually, territory by territory, the land came under Israelite control. Some cities surrendered peacefully, others resisted fiercely. Treaties were made. Enemies were driven out. Tribal territories were assigned, transforming a wandering people into settlers. Yet the conquest was not absolute. Pockets of opposition remained, reminders that the struggle for faithfulness would continue beyond military victories. The greatest danger was not external enemies but internal compromise. Adopting the cultures and gods of surrounding nations. In his old age, Joshua gathered the tribes one final time. His voice carried the weight of decades, battles fought, miracles witnessed, sacrifices endured. "Choose this day whom you will serve," he declared. "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It was not merely a farewell speech. It was a warning, a call to loyalty, a recognition that the true battle was spiritual, not territorial. Joshua died at the age of 110, leaving behind not monuments or palaces, but a nation rooted in a land once thought unreachable. The wilderness generation had wandered. The new generation had crossed. Promise had become possession. Yet history would soon show that conquering land was easier than maintaining faith. The promised land was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter filled with cycles of victory, failure, repentance, and redemption. Because the greatest wars are not always fought with swords. Sometimes they are fought in the human heart. After Joshua died, the unity of Israel began to fracture like dry earth under relentless heat. There was no king. No central authority. No single voice to guide the people. Each tribe settled into its own territory, focused on survival, prosperity, and comfort. Slowly, almost invisibly, they drifted away from the covenant that had brought them into the land. Ancient enemies remained. Foreign cultures surrounded them. New gods promised easy blessings without difficult obedience. A haunting pattern emerged. The people abandoned God. Oppression followed. They cried out for help. A deliverer arose. Peace returned, for a time. These deliverers were called judges, not kings, not prophets in the traditional sense, but leaders raised up in moments of crisis. Flawed humans empowered for extraordinary tasks. The first storms came quickly. Raiding armies swept across the land, stealing crops, livestock, and freedom. Villages burned. Families hid in caves. The promised land began to feel like occupied territory. Then rose a woman unlike any leader before her, Deborah. She was both prophet and judge, wise and fearless, sitting beneath a palm tree where people came for guidance. When enemy forces oppressed the northern tribes with iron chariots, unstoppable machines of war, Deborah summoned a hesitant commander named Barak. "Go to battle," she said, "for victory is promised." Barak agreed, but only if Deborah went with him. She did. The battle that followed defied expectations. As the armies clashed, a sudden storm turned the battlefield into mud. Iron chariots, once symbols of invincibility, became useless, trapped in the mire. Panic spread through enemy ranks. Israel triumphed. But the final blow came not from a soldier, but from an ordinary woman named Jael, who courageously ended the threat with quiet precision. Deborah's victory song echoed across the land. A reminder that deliverance can come through unexpected hands. Years of peace followed. Then the cycle repeated. New oppressors arose, the Midianites, ruthless raiders who swept in like locusts every harvest season, leaving nothing behind. Israel was starving, broken, humiliated. In a hidden winepress, a man named Gideon secretly threshed wheat, trying to salvage food without being seen. An angel appeared with surprising words. "Mighty warrior." Gideon looked around, confused. He saw no army, no power, only fear. Yet he was chosen. Reluctant and uncertain, Gideon asked for signs, fleece wet with dew while the ground remained dry, then the reverse. Patience met his doubt. When the time for battle came, Gideon gathered thousands of soldiers. But instead of increasing the army, God reduced it, first to 300 men. 300 against an overwhelming force. Armed not with swords alone but with torches hidden in jars and trumpets, they surrounded the enemy camp at night. At Gideon's signal, jars shattered, flames burst into the darkness, horns blared, voices shouted. Confusion exploded. Believing themselves surrounded by a massive army, the Midianites panicked, turning on one another in terror. Victory came not through strength, but through strategy and divine intervention. Again, peace returned. But peace without faith breeds complacency. Soon the darkest chapter unfolded, the story of Samson. Before his birth, an angel announced he would be dedicated to God from the womb, set apart with supernatural strength. As he grew, his power became legendary. He tore apart a lion with his bare hands, defeated enemies single-handedly, carried city gates on his shoulders. Yet his greatest weakness was not physical, it was spiritual. Impulsive, driven by desire, Samson repeatedly compromised his calling. He trusted the wrong people, ignored warnings, and played dangerously with secrets meant to protect him. Finally, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah. The enemy bribed her to discover the source of his strength. Again and again she pressed him, wore him down, tested his answers. At last, exhausted and emotionally vulnerable, Samson revealed the truth: his strength was tied to his vow, symbolized by his uncut hair. As he slept, she betrayed him. His hair was cut. His strength vanished. He was captured. The once invincible warrior was blinded, chained, forced to grind grain like an animal. The enemy celebrated, believing their God had triumphed over Israel's hero. But hair grows back. In a final act of desperate faith, Samson prayed for strength one last time. During a great festival, he was brought into a massive temple as entertainment for the crowd. He placed his hands on the pillars supporting the structure. With a cry of surrender and determination, he pushed. The pillars cracked. Stone groaned. The entire building collapsed. In death, Samson destroyed more enemies than in his life, a tragic victory born from failure, courage, and redemption intertwined. The era of the judges ended not with triumph, but with moral chaos. The book closes with a haunting statement. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Violence escalated. Civil war erupted between tribes. Social order deteriorated. The Promised Land, once a symbol of hope, teetered on the edge of self-destruction. The people began to long for something new: stability, leadership, a king. They did not yet realize that kings bring both glory and danger. The age of heroes was ending. The age of monarchy was about to begin. And with it would come towering figures, warriors, poets, tyrants, and legends whose stories would shape history forever. Israel was tired of chaos. For generations they had lived without a king, guided only by judges who rose and fell like storms. Now the surrounding nations mocked them. Every people had a crown, a throne, an army led by a single ruler. So they demanded one. The prophet Samuel was old, his hair silver like winter. He warned them that kings take sons for war, daughters for labor, fields for taxes, freedom for power. But the people would not listen. "We want a king." God granted their request. Not as reward, but as concession. From the tribe of Benjamin came a man who looked like royalty itself, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. His name was Saul. At first, Saul was humble, even hiding among baggage when chosen. But when enemies attacked, he rallied the tribes with fierce courage and delivered a stunning victory. Israel finally had a king, a warrior who inspired confidence. Yet power changes the human heart. Saul began to rely on his own judgment rather than divine guidance. Impatience grew. Pride hardened. When ordered to wait for Samuel before offering sacrifice, Saul could not endure the delay. He performed the ritual himself, a king acting as priest. Samuel arrived too late. "You have not kept the command," the prophet said gravely. "Your kingdom will not endure." From that moment, Saul's reign was shadowed by instability. His victories continued, but his spirit darkened. Jealousy, paranoia, sudden rage. The throne he had fought to secure began slipping from his grasp. Meanwhile, far from the palace, destiny was growing unnoticed. In the hills of Bethlehem lived a shepherd boy named David. The youngest son, overlooked even by his own family, he spent long days guarding sheep from predators, singing songs to the sky, learning courage in solitude. When Samuel came seeking the future king, David was not even invited to the gathering. Only after all older brothers were rejected did someone remember the boy in the fields. Ruddy-faced, bright-eyed, smelling of pasture and sun, he did not look like a king. But God sees differently. Samuel anointed him quietly. No crown. No throne. Just oil poured on a shepherd's head, a secret destiny planted in obscurity. Soon after, David was summoned to the palace for an unexpected reason. Saul was tormented by deep emotional anguish, and David's music soothed him. The future king became a servant to the present one, playing harp in dimly lit chambers, calming storms he did not cause. Then came the moment that would echo through history. War broke out with the Philistines. Two armies faced each other across a valley, locked in stalemate. Every day a giant stepped forward, a warrior named Goliath. He was enormous, armored in bronze, voice booming like thunder. He mocked Israel, challenged them, humiliated them. No one dared face him. Until a shepherd boy arrived bringing food to his brothers. David heard the giant's taunts and burned with righteous anger. He volunteered to fight, armed not with armor but with a sling and 5 smooth stones. Goliath laughed. The battlefield fell silent as boy and giant approached each other, innocence against intimidation, faith against brute strength. David swung the sling. The stone flew like a guided missile of destiny. It struck Goliath's forehead. The giant staggered, fell, and the earth shook as his massive body hit the ground. David used the giant's own sword to finish the victory. Shock turned to jubilation. Fear turned to courage. Israel surged forward, routing the enemy. David became a national hero overnight. Songs spread through the land. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Those words pierced Saul's heart like daggers. Admiration turned to suspicion. Suspicion to obsession. Jealousy consumed him. More than once Saul hurled a spear at David in fits of rage. Eventually David fled, becoming a fugitive, hunted by the very king he had served faithfully. He hid in caves, deserts, forests, gathering followers who were outcasts, warriors, men seeking purpose. Despite opportunities, David refused to kill Saul. Twice he spared the king's life, proving his loyalty even while being hunted. He believed the throne must come by divine timing, not violence. Saul's decline accelerated. Isolated, desperate, he sought guidance even from forbidden sources. Meanwhile, David grew not just as a warrior, but as a leader forged by hardship. Finally came the decisive battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. Israel's army collapsed. Saul's sons were killed. Wounded in facing capture, Saul chose death over humiliation. The first king fell on his own sword. News reached David, who mourned deeply, not celebrating an enemy's death, but grieving the tragedy of a fallen leader. Soon after, the tribes recognized what destiny had long prepared. David was crowned king. Not a prince raised in luxury, but a shepherd forged in wilderness. Not a ruler chosen for appearance, but for heart. Under his leadership, Israel would unite, expand, and flourish, though not without future trials of its own. The transition from Saul to David was not just political. It was symbolic. Human power had failed. Divine purpose had prevailed. A nation that once wandered leaderless now stood on the threshold of its golden age. And the shepherd who faced a giant would soon face even greater battles, not only on fields of war, but within his own soul.